We are canceling all our regular programs for the next 8 hours so that ABC News can bring you full coverage of the 1972 elections. ABC News presents complete nationwide coverage of tonight's Election 72. Now from election headquarters in New York, the anchormen of the ABC Evening News, Harry Reasoner and Howard K. Smith.
Good evening. Well, at last the long wait is over. Tonight we find out whether the pollsters were right and there's going to be a Nixon landslide. Partly right, he'll win a modest victory, or whether they were wrong and McGovern's going to win. As you can see, we already have some popular votes up on our board, with 1% of the nation's precincts having reported in. Nixon has 66% of the votes counted so far. These come mainly from 3 states, Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee, and McGovern 33%. We also have a state result, in the presidential election. In the state of Indiana, Nixon is the winner of Indiana's 13 electoral votes by projection from the result in key precincts. To repeat, Nixon carries Indiana, no surprise.
And another no surprise so far in the state of Kentucky in the presidential race. President ABC News projects that Nixon will win that state. With 48% of the precincts reported, actually he has 65% of the vote. He carried it in 1968, but by a much smaller margin, and of course that's because there was George Wallace there.
We have projected that Indiana has been won by President Nixon, but here's the way the raw vote looks in the presidential race in Indiana. In the presidential race in Indiana, President Nixon leads, as you can see by the figures there. Only 12% of the precincts are in, but they include our key precincts, which tell us that Nixon's going to win.
We're also beginning to get some meaningful popular votes, plus some meaningful analysis on some rather major states. For instance, the presidential race in the state of Ohio. There are only 1% of the precincts so far reporting, but Mr. Nixon's lead is 67-32, which is a little bit more than 2-1, a little bit more than double. And our indications from ABC's key precincts is that he is running strongly all through the state, that this is not just some particular area where Republicans have always won well. The same thing in the state of Tennessee, which is 10 electoral votes, and with 17% of the precincts in, Mr. Nixon is holding an almost unbelievable lead of 70%. In 1968, he took the state, but with only 37%. He almost split it with Governor Wallace, with Senator Humphrey, the third runner. I suppose nobody has ever taken the state of Tennessee by 70% vote. Would you think,
it would be a big surprise.
We have a projection now. ABC's decision desk projects that in the state of Georgia, President Nixon will win the 12 electoral votes from Georgia, which means that at the moment, the president is getting 80% of the vote there, as you see, which is no surprise. At the moment, the president has 41 electoral votes total, as far as our ABC projections go here in New York tonight.
ABC News has just added a 4th state to the states we project will be in President Nixon's column when all the votes are in, Georgia, with 12 electoral votes, bringing his total up a little bit. Howard?
If the president's total is now 41 electoral votes, it may be worthwhile looking at the board showing which states he has. President Nixon now has 41 electoral votes. McGovern so far has won none of those 4 states.
If you look at the presidential race in the state of Michigan, which is one of the industrial states where George McGovern's people believe that he has a serious chance of taking it. In the presidential race in the state of Michigan, there are a total of 102 votes in, and even though they are running almost 4-1 for Mr. Nixon, I don't suppose that even Tully Plesser would make a prediction on that basis. If you look at Ohio, you have a little more information. In the presidential race in Ohio, it had been conceded to Mr. Nixon in the polls, but there was enough concern so that he made one of his rare visits to a state to go out there. He's now running ahead with 4% of the precincts in, about 2-1, and furthermore, on the basis of ABC's key precincts in Ohio, he's doing very well all the way across.
we have a state projection in the presidential election. In the presidential election in the state of Illinois, President Nixon is projected winner of Illinois' 26 electoral votes, the biggest individual prize of the night so far. To repeat, Nixon carries Illinois.
We have one of the certain states, South Carolina, is now projected to be in the Nixon column with its 8 electoral votes, giving President Nixon so far now 75 electoral votes on his way to the 270, and with none so far for Senator McGovern.
Harry, let's take a look at the recap board for the electoral vote, which is the one that counts. Popular vote is popular, but electoral vote counts. President Nixon now has 75 electoral votes so far. Senator McGovern has nothing. President Nixon needs, in other words, 195 more electoral votes to win. We have a projection in the presidential election. Nixon is projected winner of Virginia's 12 electoral votes. Nixon carries Virginia as he did in 60, as he did in 1968. That is no surprise, but that adds to his total.
Mr. Nixon with 1,757,000 votes at the moment. Senator McGovern with 828,773. That's the national popular vote in a good many areas where there's very little popular vote yet recorded because of ABC's key precincts. ABC News has been able to project the winners, which is why we are now able to say that Richard Nixon has 87 electoral votes to none for George McGovern.
Let's look at the presidential board now and take a look at the latest figures. President Nixon, of course, leading Senator McGovern with 4% of the precincts in. We should warn that those figures, as far as percentage, are misleading as far as the 67 versus 32. They are from rural areas and small states. New York's polls have not closed. Senator McGovern may do better in New York. Massachusetts, Senator McGovern may take. That state's polls are not closed. The big cities, Philadelphia, Chicago, they have yet to report. We have another projection from the ABC decision desk for the state of Vermont. ABC News projects that President Nixon will be the winner in the state of Vermont over Senator McGovern. With 4% of the precincts in, you see the percentage of the raw vote that's now recorded.
In the presidential election in the state of Vermont, Nixon is projected winner of Vermont's 3 electoral votes. No surprise, Vermont's voted Democratic only once in 100 years. Repeating, Nixon carries Vermont.
We have 2 other projections in the presidential race, Howard, and one of them is a key state, Florida, with 17 electoral votes. ABC News now projects will be in President Nixon's column. He's running with 22% of the precinct reporting. He's running with about 75% of the vote, as opposed to the 41% of the vote he got in Florida in 1968 when George Wallace was in it. ABC News also projects in the presidential race in Alabama that Richard Nixon will be the winner, with 6% of the precincts in, with enough of our key precincts in so that we can see how it's going. He's running with 79% of the vote.
Nixon is projected to be the winner in West Virginia at this moment by results from key precincts that ABC has maintained. Nixon carries one of the most democratic states in the Union, West Virginia, which he's never carried before.
ABC News projects that in the race in North Carolina, President Nixon will get North Carolina and its 13 votes. Very few precincts have reported in the popular vote, but we have enough of our key precincts to judge that he will take the state, giving him a total now of 135 electoral votes.
135, Harry, is 1/2 of 270. Nixon's halfway there now with that.
A new state projection by ABC News, President Nixon will get New Hampshire's 4 electoral votes, giving him a total of 139 so far, none for George McGovern.
Well, the polls predicted this, although the eastern seaboard states are still voting, and of course in the far west. If you recall, I think that the Republican Party this time adopted in its platform almost every single item rejected at the Democratic convention, and it means that the average citizen who used to be in control of the party is going to take it back over.
Absolutely no surprise that in the District of Columbia, ABC News projects that George McGovern has won that 3 electoral votes, those 3 electoral votes. Those are the first 3 that we have projected for Senator McGovern this evening. The District of Columbia, of course, has gone Democratic since time immemorial.
Nixon has won about 11 states with a total of 139 electoral votes. George McGovern has 3 electoral votes from the District of Columbia.
Florida, where that is where, more clearly than any place else, it's what happened to the George Wallace vote. It went 95%. The vote that George Wallace got in the primary went to Richard Nixon in the general election, which is why he was able to, why Mr. Nixon is running 3-1 over George McGovern in a state that for the South is regarded as mixed. We have a projection also in Connecticut in the presidential race. ABC News projects that Mr. Nixon will hold and the lead he has got with 17% of the precincts reported and will take Connecticut's 8 electoral votes.
Let's take a look now at how the electoral vote is going. We've had about 13 or 14 results now. With Maryland, they add up to 160 electoral votes for Nixon to 3 for McGovern. McGovern's 3 coming from the District of Columbia. The state of Pennsylvania, the third most populous state in the nation, with 27 electoral votes to give. Richard Nixon is leading now in the raw vote with 3% of the precincts in. He has 62% of the vote. McGovern has 37%. But studying our key precincts, we find that McGovern continues to run very strongly in the cities of Pennsylvania, which is a surprise because the mayor of Pittsburgh refused to work for him and the mayor of Philadelphia, Frank Rizzo, worked against him.
Whatever optimism there is still in the McGovern camp, for instance, in Massachusetts, McGovern is holding a sizable lead with only a few of the precincts in the popular vote, but is holding a sizable lead in key precincts, running especially well in Boston and in other urban areas. It continues not to be that way in other states where we have enough information to make a projection. In the presidential race in Oklahoma, no surprise, we now project that President Nixon will take Oklahoma and its 8 electoral votes, bringing him up to a total of 168, if I'm adding correctly. He's running very well. Oklahoma, I suppose, would be, well, they call Oklahoma Little Dixie. It would be more like the South in the way it thinks and the way it votes than most states in what you would generally think of as the Southwest.
It's becoming increasingly a conservative state.
With 27% of the popular vote in, the Nixon lead is very substantial, 60% to 38%. And ABC News Analysis Desk notes that in Cleveland, Mr. Nixon is getting 50.5%, and that's an awful lot for a Republican.
Nixon is projected winner of Pennsylvania's 27 electoral votes. To repeat, Nixon, by projection, carries Pennsylvania.
Following the pattern of the popular vote, ABC News is now able to project the winner in 2 more states. In Texas, with its 26 electoral votes, ABC News projects that President Nixon will take it. He's running ahead with a very small popular vote in by about the same percentage that he is nationally, and he will take the state. He's in Tennessee, where he was expected to win, and where the Republicans have been running very well all night. ABC News now projects that he will take the victory. There, nearly 80% of the precincts are in, and he's running ahead of his national totals in Tennessee. The presidential race in the state of Michigan, ABC News projects that it will go to Richard Nixon. A very small part of the popular vote is in, but our key precincts are in, and we project that Michigan and its 21 electoral votes will go to Richard Nixon, a state where even recent polls by newspapers there indicated that Senator McGovern had some chance.
I have one more projected result here, Harry. In the state of Kansas, Nixon is projected the winner of the state of Kansas in its 7 electoral votes. He's won them every time he's run before, so this is no surprise. We might take a look at the recapitulation of this whole electoral vote situation. Nixon now has 259 electoral votes to McGovern's 3. Nixon, in short, is within 9 votes, within 19 votes, within 11 votes of winning the presidency.
Arkansas has just been projected as going in the Nixon column. Its 6 electoral votes brings his total to 265. Has not won Arkansas before. That was a Wallace state in 1968. It's not a state that normally votes Republican. It has just re-elected a Democratic governor. But with 1% of the precincts reported, Arkansas is giving Mr. Nixon something like 66% of the vote. In 1968, he got 31%.
Harry, as a point of history, Richard Nixon becomes the first Democrat to carry Arkansas. The first Democrat to carry for 100 years, the first Republican to carry Arkansas for 100 years, the last being Ulysses S. Grant. Well, let's take a look at the total of the electoral vote now. Richard Nixon has 265 electoral votes to McGovern's 3. McGovern's 3 coming from the District of Columbia. Nixon's 265 coming from 23 states. So we have results from almost half the United States.
ABC News projects in the presidential race in Massachusetts that it will be taken by George McGovern, his second set of electoral votes, 14 more, giving him 17, and delaying for the moment what would seem to be the inevitable triumph or the 270 for Richard Nixon.
Excuse me,
Out of a
Harry.
total of 500.
We have a projected result which will put Nixon across the top. In the state of Ohio, Nixon is declared the winner by ABC News projection. Ohio and its 26 electoral votes go to Nixon by our projection on the basis of key precincts. That will serve, I believe, to put Mr. Nixon across by a good deal more than he needed. He had 265 electoral votes. Now with your wonderful mathematical mind, you add that up for me and tell me how many votes
I think
he's
it makes
got.
something like 291, if I add it correctly. If your word was 26.
Nixon wins re-election to the presidency. That's what that means. There's no doubt about it.
And you say with more than he needed, and he's obviously going to get a good deal more. President Nixon is continuing to increase his electoral vote lead over Senator McGovern in the presidential race in New Mexico. ABC News now projects that President Nixon will take that state and its 4 electoral votes, bringing him up to 338 at least, maybe 342 now. I'm not sure whether that's included. ABC News projects that President Nixon will take Iowa's 8 electoral votes for president. He's running 20% ahead of Senator McGovern with 6% of the precincts in.
Let's now hear from Jean Westwood. She's the chairman of the Democratic Party in the Washington Hilton Democratic headquarters in Washington. She came down a few minutes ago to thank the workers.
First, I want to say thanks not only to all of you in this room, but to all of you across the country who have worked for the Democratic Party you believe in, for the candidates you believe in, and who have made a difference in this country that is never going to be forgotten, no matter which races we win and lose tonight, because you have shown on all sides, and for those of you who work for all candidates, the kind of dedication to the country you believe in that makes me be proud to be the chairman of your party. I know that all of you are going to be around as we go through the next years because you believe in the kind of America I believe in, and I really came down to say thanks to all of you.
A videotape recording of Jean Westwood's remarks to the workers in Washington at Democratic Party headquarters. Mrs. Westwood is the chairman of the Democratic Party. That was recorded a few minutes ago.
In electoral votes, the president should have something around 372 to McGovern's 17. 372, 270 needed to elect McGovern 17 due to Massachusetts and the District of Columbia. Harry, incidentally, we have a projected result in the presidential election in Missouri. Nixon won the state by an eyelash in 1968, 4 years ago. By our projection, he wins Missouri again tonight.
There's another state where Senator McGovern has a chance before we get to the Middle West and to the West, a chance to increase his electoral total, and that's the state of Rhode Island. Only 4 electoral votes, the nation's smallest state, with 2% of the precincts in there. McGovern is holding a substantial lead over Nixon, 55% to 45%. The totals are very small, but almost all of the totals in Rhode Island are very small.
In the state of Wisconsin, a very tight presidential race. Nobody seems to be pulling ahead in our key precinct vote. However, at present, Nixon holds the raw vote lead with only 3% of the precincts having reported in. But I have to issue the warning that that state is extremely close in the key precincts, which will tell the outcome.
Well, obviously, there's not much cause for dancing in the streets of Sioux Falls, South Dakota tonight. Senator McGovern, we understand, has prepared his statement of concession. As a matter of fact, I'm told he may have worked on it this afternoon before the polls closed.
Governor, we've seen the South vote heavily tonight, most heavily since the days of Reconstruction in favor of a Republican president. Do you think this signifies a new political alignment down here in the South?
I think, of course, that it means that the average citizen in this part of the country thinks about platform and thinks about demand. It just so happens that the Democratic Party rejected planks in the platform in Miami that the overwhelming majority of Southerners stood for. And those planks later were adopted by the Republican Party. And I predicted in Miami to the Liberal Democratic Convention that if they rejected these planks on the matter of national defense, on the matter of busing, on the matter of welfare, law and order, that they would lose, and they did lose. And I think that the Democratic Party is going to have to be restructured, taken back over by those who believe that the average citizen should be the king and queen of the Democratic Party as they used to be. And I think they've rejected the liberal, elitist viewpoint of those who control the convention in Miami.
Well, Governor, it seems there's going to be a new kind of reconstruction here in the South. Are you going to be part of that new reconstruction?
Of the Democratic Party?
Yes, sir.
Since I received more votes than the other candidates, including Mr. McGovern, in the primaries in which we contested one another, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Maryland, Florida, you add them up where we were all together, I received more votes on the platform that I offered to the Democratic Party that was rejected.
Governor, we have to go. Thank you very much, sir.
A very important projected result in the state of Wisconsin. By our projection, Nixon carries Wisconsin.
One prominent backer of President Nixon has been entertainer Sammy Davis Jr. Davis told ABC's David Shoemaker in Washington tonight that he and other black celebrities had come under some heat in the black community for backing the president. Correspondent Shoemaker then asked about the nature of Davis's commitment and what he expects from 4 more years of Mr. Nixon in the White House.
Well, for most people, the awareness that Sammy Davis Jr. was supporting President Nixon came at the convention when you suddenly threw your arms around him. Now, was that all impulsive, or had you thought long and hard before you decided you were for President Nixon?
No, I had made my commitment to the president about 2 weeks prior to that, but I must tell you that the hug, which is the thing that shocked all of the world, it seems now.
Including President Nixon, just
I think so. That was totally impulsive. It was based upon what he had said. And he had said something very kind, and I didn't know what else to do, and I just ran up and hugged him, because I'm that kind of a guy. I think people know that. At least I would like to think that most people know that.
Sam, if you would look at the audience,
yes,
you still have to see that a Republican audience that loves you still nevertheless is mostly a white Republican audience. Now, does that bother you?
I see a lot of black faces out there. I see more black faces in this audience than I've seen on the platforms with McGovern in the last few weeks. And I'm very pleased with the blacks who are involved in here, because most of the black Republicans, please know that they put everything they had on the line for the man. And that's an important commitment to make. And I think there are a lot of black closet Republicans who will now come out and say, hallelujah, we won.
Well, what would you expect? What do you hope for from the president in the 4 years that are to come?
To really concentrate on some of the problems that deal with the inner city, trying to revitalize some of the programs that have been, for one reason or another, sort of put on the side. I'd like to see him reinitiate some of the programs that have been canceled. These are the things that I'm concerned about. My commitment to the president was based upon one thing, that I think the next 4 years will show amazing strides in his relationships with the people who are disenfranchised. And that's my commitment.
Just after 10:30 in the East, 27% of the nation's precincts have reported, and one of the questions left seems to be, will Richard Nixon get the largest popular vote in history, greater than Lyndon Johnson did in 1964?
We have another projected winner in the presidential race in the state of Nevada with its 3 electoral votes. Nixon is projected as the winner of those 3 electoral votes in Nevada. Nixon wins Nevada.
Well, Mr. Smith, I'd like to think that these were the fruits of my labors, but I'm afraid they're not. I rather think the election results tonight reflect great confidence in the American people in the actions of the president, particularly in the field of foreign relations, his efforts to bring peace to this world. And more than that, I think it reflects a confidence in his courage to meet the domestic problems that we have. I must say I would assign even a further reason for this unprecedented sweep in the history of American politics, and that is simply that Senator McGovern, as I thought, really misjudged the American people, was outside the mainstream of his own party and the people generally in the country.
In the state of Montana in the presidential race, ABC News now projects that Richard Nixon will take that state and its 4 electoral votes.
In the state of Utah, the same result. Our projected result is that Nixon will carry Utah and its 4 electoral votes. No surprise, he's done it before. He was expected to do it tonight. It's 11 o'clock at night here in the eastern United States, and the presidential board shows a slight change. About 2 hours ago, President Nixon had 67% of the votes. It's gradually declined to where it's now 63% of the votes to McGovern's 36%. In electoral votes, President Nixon is way ahead with 440 electoral votes to McGovern's 17, deriving from D.C. and the state of Massachusetts.
And there's just been a substantial further blow to George McGovern. ABC News now projects that in the race in his home state of South Dakota, he becomes the first presidential candidate in living memory to lose his home state, and particularly in a state which never had a presidential candidate before. But they still, ABC News projects he will lose it to Richard Nixon.
In the presidential contest, Nixon has carried New Jersey. That was the only Northeast industrial state he carried last time. Now he carries it again this time.
ABC News projects that President Nixon will take Wyoming and its 3 electoral votes to add to his total. He's running 60% to 40% in the scattered early popular returns. ABC News projects that he will take Idaho, next door out there in that area. And ABC News projects that he will also take the state of Arizona, Barry Goldwater's state, with its 6 electoral votes. One place after another where George McGovern might have expected some success has failed him tonight. The latest, the state of Rhode Island. ABC News now projects that Rhode Island, most unusually, will go Republican in a very tight race, giving its 4 electoral votes to Richard Nixon.
Presidency belongs to someone else, but the glory of these devoted working friends and their dedication to the noble ideals of this country sustains us now, and it will sustain our country. We will shed no tears because all of this effort, I am positive, will bear fruit for years to come.